Dzień dobry Państwu. Witam bardzo serdecznie.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you for arriving here for this very extra meeting, conversation, or a panel devoted to the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski. First of all, I would like to welcome our guests who accepted the invitation to come, who will be presented more in detail by Piotr Gruszczyński, whom I invited to be the facilitator of this panel. Welcome. 10 years ago, during the festival, I set up a panel when Krzysztof Warlikowski was creating his new theatre in Warsaw. The panel was named A Theatre That Is Looking for a Name. I decided that after 10 years being away from the building at Madlińskiego Street, though we all the time remember it and send our best wishes, it's good to have a look and have an insight into the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski. In my perception, an artist who has followed his own path, created a new quality, a new value, and a new language. He has created new liberty, and that is what we shall focus on today. This meeting is streamed online. It shall be followed by a publication. So, enjoy. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Director Ewa Pilawska for this possibility of arranging such a debate. Hardly ever we talk today about the theatre, and the group of experts we have here is unique and excellent. Let me begin by introducing the fact that we have Krzysztof Warlikowski with us. At the top, hidden. And it's a bit a situation as if we are in an anatomical theatre, but the patient is not on the table in the center, but somewhere hidden. But we'll be discussing him in his presence. Let me introduce the speakers one by one. Let me begin from the far end. Ms. Professor Joanna Tokarska-Bakir. I believe that in Poland she requires no further introduction, and her achievements, her great books on our very complex past with Jews, a book on the Kielce pogrom. Joanna Tokarska-Bakir is currently the head of the Slavic Studies Institute in Warsaw at the Polish Academy of Sciences. And he's with us. I'll explain why we have these guests. She's here with us because she's been observing Warlikowski Theatre for a very long time, and somehow we made friends over this theatre. That's the phenomenon of Warlikowski Theatre, that around him friendship arise, also friendships that come out of intellectual fascination, and that's the case of Joanna Tokarska-Bakir. Guy Szerki, he is critic, music critic, opera critic, theatre critic, and he's a person who, in his artistic critique, sort of imposes not today's standard to this profession. We complain about the collapse of the critics. It's superficial, it's flat. Guy writes beautiful essays, and I need to say that he's joined us not so long time ago, and mostly due to Krzysztof opera interest, but the review he wrote on Apollonia he saw after so many years after the premiere is text that sets a new way of thinking about this very performance. So let me welcome him. I'm happy you're with us. Next to him, Caroline Losch, dramaturg who, when working in the Stuttgart Theatre, organized there an international theatrical project whose artistic boss was Oliver Friedrich. It was named European Ensemble, and we, as the Theatre Nowy, were a partner to the project. Also, our actors were delegated to work in Stuttgart, and they were. Our Polish directors were there. They were invited to that project. It was a major one, but it also resulted in friendships, bonds that were established. The Stuttgart Theatre was the theatre when Krzysztof used to work as a young director, so we knew the theatre pretty well, but we managed to come closer with Caroline. Now, she doesn't work any longer for a theatre, but she is a lecturer at the Berlin school that is named Weisen Sie Kunstschule. I'm sorry, I had to read it. I don't speak German. At the Europa performance you saw yesterday, Caroline cooperated with our dramaturgs team, Krzysztof Warlikowski included, so the bond is getting still closer, and I believe that would be one of the opinions that is on the edge of being within the team as well as being outside of it. I believe you will still keep some distant view. Theresa Benér, theatre critic who represents the distant and little-known part of the continent, namely Scandinavia. She lives in Malmö in Sweden. She writes for key Scandinavian papers and magazines. She's been observing Krzysztof Theatre for so many years. She's been with us and Teatr Nowy. She's been to the showcase we organized. She wrote about the Polish theatre. She is a sort of ambassador of ours in the north part of Europe, in Scandinavia. She wrote a book about Petersburg art, and she is the author of the latest interview given by Peter Brook. Theresa Benér. Christian Longchamp, a dramaturg, first of all, I should say, a man involved in Krzysztof Theatre for many years, an author of many opera performances. In opera, Krzysztof works mostly with Christian Longchamp and Miron Hackenberg. These are the two people who support him in terms of dramaturgy in opera. I believe that Christian will give us an insight into the process because they work so closely. At the same time, we may say he represents the old good European humanism, knowledge and perspective and culture and art that combines different phenomena into one entity. He doesn't treat those as separate items. Christian Longchamp. Anna Lewandowska, the youngest participant to this panel. We wanted to get a fresh here. Anna works for Nowy Teatr ever since its very beginning, ever since it was established. She performed different jobs, all to the great successes, And for a couple of years, she's worked in the literary department together with me. And starting a couple of performances ago, she joined the dramaturgy team. So she is a dramaturg as well. And I believe Anya's opinion would be most centered one, as Anya has this unique feature. He takes notes during rehearsals. She jots that down. She has thick notebooks filled with notes, but she wouldn't share any of those. And as far as I know, I don't know what she's going to talk about, but today you'll be the first ones she will share her notes with in public. How are we going to run this very meeting? And my name is Piotr Gruszczyński. I'm a dramaturg in Nowy Teatr. I've been working with Krzysztof ever since the Nowy Teatr was established. Prior to that, I'd been a theatre critic, and I wrote quite a lot about Krzysztof's theatre. We published a book together. It's named Shakespeare, the Europa. It's a collection of interpretations of on how to read Shakespeare today. Well, the meeting will begin by three speeches of every person about the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski Theatre. I asked for the speeches to be 7 minutes. I'm afraid we may expect a bit longer than that, though I trust we have enough time to listen to all of those. Afterwards, we'll try to wrap up what we have heard, and perhaps together we may discuss the phenomenon and write down what it's all about. I truly doubt it, but we are just here to take a try. I have prepared the introduction. I believe everybody has something in writing, because it's a pretty stressful situation for us. We wouldn't like to make a mistake. So I'll try to follow the text I have written. At first, the question of the phenomenon of Warlikowski theatre seemed to me very general, with a school-like quality. However, I rebelled. On a second attempt, it was an impossible question. It was like a strange equation where all the unknowns are revealed, but nothing comes out of it, because the solution, the conclusions we reach are disappointing. We describe in a too simple a way something that requires a new name. The conclusions simplify the image of the theatre, of the phenomenon, and they turn it banal, but they are not matching the excellent individuals here in the audience expecting revelations. So a crisis arrived in thinking, but crises are good. So I started thinking, what phenomenon should we truly be talking about? Should we be discussing the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre, or perhaps we should be speaking about the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski himself? And these are two totally distant features, though overlapping. Shouldn't be a conversation about the theatre as a team of cooperating creative people. That's one of the options, but another one tempting is entering inside the artist's head, see what's going on, how the thinking processes go. Are the riddles solved on their own, or do we need a team to solve them? It encourages thinking about this festival, where we have this cracking, exploding head. The conversation about the theater as a discussion about a group of creative collaborating people. The second option is the had. Krzysztof frequently repeats he doesn't make the theater because he knows what he wants to say, but because he doesn't. And the process of creating a theatrical utterance is a process of reaching a possible version. But of what? Of an answer? I don't think. I believe of a question. And that question is something we, the viewers, take back home and start working on our own.
I believe it's going on like that, and I would like it to be like that. We can enumerate some features that make Warlikowski's theatre a phenomenon. The phenomenon of an artist and his language is always stemming from uniqueness, what then determines the uniqueness of Warlikowski's theatre? For instance, working with the same team for many years and creating a theatrical space designed to provide proper conditions for the artist, for the team, and inviting younger creators who understand theatre in a similar way. In the Polish system of public theatres, this guarantees an institution of like Nowy Teatr. The phenomenon is understood as something unique, but it's co-created by Małgorzata Szcześniak, who is absent today. Please remember, Krzysztof Warlikowski has not created a single production without her. It's also the acting company, some of whom have been working with him for several decades. Paweł Mykietyn, the composer, Felice Rose, lighting designer, lighting director, the person speaking these words, responsible for dramaturgy, and there are new people. But death takes its toll and steals our distinguished employees. Recently, we have lost 3 important actors, Ewa Dałkowska, Jadwiga Jankowska-Cieślak, and Stanisław Brudny, but the core of the team remains unchanged. The process of loss and mourning we experienced revealed some hidden features of the company and performances, showing how much depends on the phenomenon of individual creators, how much the process triggered by Krzysztof is based on delving deeper into new modes of imagining and creating. What comes next? There is a long stage of reading or discussed rehearsals, which shows that actors internalize every single word that their characters say. They create bridges filled with their personalities and ways of thinking. Perhaps this is from where the conviction stems that there is no written word by a specific person. There are only expressions made by the actors. Moreover, there is something we cannot see, namely the backstage, where the same people have been working for many years. Consequently, in what we call a repertoire theatre, we've got a hybrid model of operation, bringing together something which we can call Compagnie Warlikowski, creating a new theatre. I believe there are more such external factors influencing the phenomenon, but this is the surface level aspect. It is easy to examine and describe, but its obviousness makes me a bit uncertain. We should avoid it. We have gathered excellent team of specialists, so there is no need sharing information from Wikipedia, because as we all know, there are underground rivers that determine the essence of things and determine what happens on the surface. And that is why what I would like to discuss it with our guests, adding my own perspective on these hidden rivers, hidden streams. I thought we should start with the people who are like outside at a certain distance, then we'll move on to those who are more inside, and then we'll end up with the outer perspective. So first, I would like to give the floor to Guy.
something in Krzysztof Warlikowski that feels like an open wound, impossible to heal, which is reflected in all his theater, and I shall try to explain briefly why. In 1967, in France, a book by Jean-Marie Domenac, Le Retour du Tragique, The Return of the Tragic, was published in France, and the introduction includes the following passage. Contemplation of Greek tragedy might have allowed French people of 1938 to glimpse their fate in the Munich Agreement. It is in this vein, which I call tragic thought, that I regard Krzysztof Warlikowski Theatre as a phenomenon, and this for several deeply interwoven reasons. He is Polish, and for me, Poland is a tragic state. Wiped off the map several times, carved up because its neighbors did not really want it to exist. The final carving up came during the Second World War, which bled Poland dry, notably causing it to lose 19% of its Jewish population and thus an essential cultural memory of its history. Because Poland was refused as a country, it became, in a sense, the country of the Warsaw Ghetto, the extermination camps, and the Holocaust. And without intending to, Poland also bears that burden. The Second World War and the Holocaust are a defining wound in Warlikowski theatre. And in Warlikowski individual, sensitive, humanist and artistic journey, he is one of the children of these tragedies. On the other hand, and under the yoke of communism, in that same 20th century, Poland gave the European cultural world some of its greatest theater theorists and directors, such as Kantor, Grotowski, and some of the greatest filmmakers, Wajda, Zanussi, Kieślowski, a sign of a vibrant cultural life that extends far beyond his borders, an expression of artistic and intellectual freedom that posed a challenge within the communist world. And the young intellectual Krzysztof Warlikowski, who was a student in Krakow, is also a product of this. And this is perhaps the third key theme of this theatrical journey. Wars and tragedies take their toll not so much on those who wage them, but on their children, sons and daughters. The question of children is indeed central to Warlikowski theatre. When, at the age of 20 or about, Warlikowski left Poland for Paris, a relationship of distance and closeness began, which he still maintains with his country of origin, one of the defining features of his theatre. He went on to study Greek tragedy, a partnership that began and would never leave him. Among his early productions were Sophocles and Euripides. But for Krzysztof, Greek tragedy is not merely a subject for staging. It is a foundation, a constant present in his thinking, and a key to understanding the world, our world. The other enduring partnership is that with Shakespeare. And it is a coincidence that his first Shakespearean production was The Merchant of Venice in 1994. A work that must necessarily be linked to what I have called his formative trauma, the view of the Jews and the relationship to the genocide of Jews perpetrated in his country. He also engaged with Hamlet very early on, the tragedy par excellence, which is the tragedy of the generation of children, the next generation we were discussing. But he also, and above all, tackled the comedies, the fairy tales plays, the Taming of the Shrew, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Tempest, Winter's Tale, Twelfth Night, those in which the actor's performance, cross-dressing and gender play dominate, that is to say, variations of humanity, while simultaneously exploring diversity, where the actor's role is decisive, in which opens up a whole new dimension. In fact, in 2008, he founded his own theater, the Novi Theatre, which I regard as his very own theater of the globe. Because Warlikowski theatrical journey is inseparable from the notion of a troupe, that is to say, a family. What I call, by reference to Greek theater, the Thiassos, in reference to the group of creatures who serve Dionysus, the god of theater. For me, there are the fundamental points that define a large part of the phenomenology of Warlikowski's spirit and his theater, where everything is interwoven. So, the moment when the venue is found, when the troupe is formed, is also the moment when another genre, opera, entered his career, and the narrative begins to take shape that has found its thread of Ariadne, and which begins with Apollonia, a veritable instruction manual for his theater, in which we weave together Greek tragedy, Polish tragedy, and the Shoah. Let us listen to Warlikowski in 2015. Day after day, I think of writers who, nearly 100 years ago, described in a prophetic yet restrained manner the decline of the European gods, the twilight that plunged our civilization into a darkness that has not yet been illuminated. I think of Franz Kafka, Thomas Mann, and Marcel Proust. Today, I would also count John Maxwell Coetzee among this group of prophets. And he concludes this text with, "And we feel powerless, horrified, and trapped." Warlikowski himself asserts, in fact, that the end of the world has passed. The end of the world, a subject addressed in Le Grand Macabre, 2024 production in Munich, is for him the Second World War and above all the Holocaust, which constitutes the extreme point of negation of human being and catastrophe insofar as it is the systematic and regulated destruction of individuals, of humanity, and of a culture. It is therefore a question of managing the aftermath. This was the issue of children, is fundamental for him. They bear the burden. A few final points. To be trapped is a consequence. It is the tragic question par excellence, embodied in Małgorzata Chesnak's sets, enclosed space where the characters often move within closed boxes made of plexiglass in Apollonia, or in Costello, or metal bars, Hamlet in the opera, or even in the high-hand section of Europa yesterday you saw. The Jewish question may be explicit, as in his production of Salome in Munich in 2019. The death of the Jews is the thematic of Salome for Warlikowski. But the Jewish question can be explicit too, implicit too. For example, in his Tristan und Isolde, staged in the setting of the Rosenberg Art Gallery in Paris, which the Gestapo transformed into the Institute for Jewish Question. And the issue of children is everywhere. Already is Iphigénie en Tauride, a tragedy of children torn apart by their parents' wars. In Apollonia, between the sacrifice of Iphigenia and the sacrificed Jewish children. In Electra, of course. In Die Frau ohne Schatten, the woman without shadow, where the issue is infertility. In Electra, of course, in Hamlet, in Macbeth, in Lady Macbeth Omsensk, in Don Carlos, in Katia Kabanova, there is always the next generation settling scores with their parents, with those who came before. And in Parsifal, in the third act, he opens the apocalyptic third act with an excerpt from Rossellini's Germany Year Zero, focusing on the blonde child Edmund wandering through the ruins. And even in dramas where children are not in principle present, for example, in Tristan and Isolde, it brings to life the orphanage where the young Tristan lived, touching on a theme never before explored, that a Tristan without parents. So, Warlikowski finds children where we don't never see children too, for example, in Tristan. And of course, in Europa, where was subject is that of children bearing the burden of a guilt they don't know, they do not understand, that on a horrific massacre perpetrated 75 years earlier. Thus, Warlikowski Theatre is that of the next generation, that of a burden one bears, not a cathartic object, but a kind of universal way to be shared. In conscience, the tragic theatre and its surmountable walls, an endless course to be settled between human beings, between us. A world without, as we saw yesterday in Europa, without Deus ex machina.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that we'll leave the summary and conclusions for the second part of our meeting. Let us move on to the second presentation. Theresa, would you please present your point of view to the phenomenon of Warlikowski's theatre?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and to the festival. Now, I've been asked to reflect on the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre. And this has occupied my mind over the last few weeks. Up until this morning, I have felt very worried about how to deal with the theme, because it is basically impossible to explain the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski. It is not that I know nothing about the theatre and opera work created by Warlikowski. In fact, I've traveled around Europe for the past 16 years to see whatever he has made. My total fascination with his work started with Un Tramway in Paris, a play that hypnotized me. It was based on Tennessee Williams' play A Streetcar Named Desire. Before that, I wasn't aware that it could be possible to stage an American, well-made, modern psychological play from the 1940s, inspired by my compatriot August Strindberg, in a completely free adaptation. It was stuffed with text quotations, from Plato to an Italian Renaissance poem to the French stand-up comedian Coluche. It had a video clip from a documentary film with the jazz singer Eartha Kitt. There was a toilet and a bathtub and a bowling hall featuring as centerpieces of Małgorzata Szczesniak's stage design. The music was a mix of jazz, rock, and an original score of quiet electronic music by Pavel Mikietin. Now, what may sound here like a mishmash of a play was, in fact, a deep meditation on gender questions and troubled relations between male and female principles that has haunted mankind at least since the antiquity. It was about desire and death, and about the human conditioning that is so deeply rooted within all of us that it makes us act in certain ways with one another without really knowing why. It relates to our shared sources of culture, history, myths, dreams, imagination, politics, philosophy. The greatness of Krzysztof Warlikowski, and indeed of his amazing artistic team, Piotr is being one of them, Claude Bardouille is up here also being one of them, is that he and they will never renounce including any of the possible threads that may lead to another layer of examining a complex question. So Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre is, I would say, a multidimensional inquiry into the human condition. Now, what makes it so acutely relevant to us all here and now is his way of eluding that which is obviously relevant here and now. His shows are like quietly dramatic movements through time, space, and different realities. There is a quality of stillness that is illusory because there's so much drama boiling underneath. The performances open up in various dimensions from a present situation so as to reveal the structures and codes that shape and define our human conscience and our subsequent actions. The actors and their characters are placed in a pluralistic universe. They're not necessarily action-driven or involved in manifest missions. They reveal themselves through situations which they relate to according to the cultural and normative systems that they are part of or that they're fighting against. Through their actions and expressions, we may altogether experience something important about a culture that defines us all, whether we actively choose it or not. We cannot escape our common shared history as human beings. We are all responsible for each other's particularities, whether we are queer or saints or violent or just conventional or banal. There's a perfect example of this shared responsibility in Europa. In the scene where Wadia, the mother of the cannibal Zacharias, says to her son that she needs to know what exactly he has done, even if it's unbearably violent and barbaric. Because, she says, don't think for a second that I am innocent. I brought you up on my own. So she claims that whatever his actions have been, she is also responsible. The whole play, Europa, studies how we are connected by shared human experiences, whether we are perpetrators or victims or just witnesses. We cannot just look away and claim that we have nothing to do with the wounds or the violence. We are all children of the massacre, says Asia in the play. In that sense, Europa can be understood as a furious comment to the way Europe, as in our continent, how Europe stands watching the ongoing crimes against humanity in the Middle East, to mention only one of many current slaughterhouses in the world. It is also perfectly coherent with the insisting discussions around Poland's guilt complex towards the Jews, victims of the Holocaust, and in the later campaigns of anti-Semitism that are so prominent in Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre. We cannot pretend that we don't know. The complex, multi-layered aesthetics of the Warlikowski performances is totally inherent to the kind of inquiry that he carries out. The stage design, the various elements of stage, like the video, lights, music, sound design, and the choreography, they all interact and present a kaleidoscopic prism of the realities that the characters will relate to. We are all made by signs and energies and movements, and this is why I keep saying that it is impossible to describe the theatre of Warlikowski, because it slips away in a kind of moving, multifaceted beauty. But I will give another fragment of how it works on stage. In Francuzzi, the French, based on Proust's novel À la recherche du temps perdu, the aristocratic circle around the Duchess of Guermantes enters the stage in a huge vitrine, a kind of display case in glass. Now, Warlikowski called his stage adaptation a Proustian installation. It's as if we experience the novel as an exhibition. In the jet set circle, there is Charles Luce, masked and wearing a costume like the fashion designer Karl Lagerfeld. Although they're all dressed in clothes of our time, they represent the old, dying Europe. The characters act almost like marionettes out of a social system, only concerned with their own status, eternal youth, and beauty. A fierce text, Ultimatum, written by Fernando Pessoa, is inserted as a monologue late in the performance. Through the character Saint-Loup, he cries out his contempt against the politicians, the intellectuals, the wealthy and the powerful, who have all contributed to the collapse of the European civilization. They're all lackeys with no other ambitions than keeping their own pathetic positions within a lost society. And the aging Charles Luce will answer something like, yes, we are all dilettantes. You too. You have to confess that we have all sinned in that aspect. And while he talks, there is a quiet sound of a Chopin nocturne, like a vague echo from the lost European past. Now, these are just a few small impressions from the incredibly rich productions by Krzysztof Warlikowski and from your amazing artists on and off the stage. Every attempt to describe this in words will lead to a disappointment, because it is simply insufficient. It has to be experienced. And I would say that's why the theatre of Krzysztof Warlikowski is a phenomenon. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję. Myślę, że
Thank you very much indeed. We are starting to understand that we could be sitting here for hours and talk, because the work we are discussing is enormous. So, just to get a little bit into the details of that work, I would like to ask Ania Lewandowska about her perception of this phenomenon. I would like to tell you about the creative process of Krzysztof Warlikowski with the actors during rehearsals. From my perspective, a dramaturgist, observer who obsessively takes notes. I suggest we have a look at two scenes. One is Europa's monologue. In the screenplay, in script, it was named 18 Children. The second is the conversation between Willy and Zacharias. Let's go into the process. The notes and thoughts I'm going to quote are written with the language the team communicates with during rehearsals. In Wajdi Muad, Zacharias was supposed to be on the stage during Europa's monologue. In the stage notes we read, he's sitting at the table eating. In the monologue, Europe says what has happened, but cannot tell it to the daughters. So one of the key elements was to invent how and to whom, at which moment, Europe's confession happens. One of the first rehearsals to be read, a conference room in a hotel in Lublin, when we performed Elizabeth Costello, a large table, office, chairs, a summit meeting like from Succession. The actor Andrzej Hyra is reading Europa's monologue, crawling on his knees around the table. Krzysztof summed it up. It was there, but if it wasn't there, because it's under the table. Andrzej wanted to cover Europa from the very beginning. He suggested using a bandage, a mask, a scarf, sunglasses. Finally, were enough. Let's move on to the second part of the scene, the mother and the son. We kept asking ourselves whether, when the scene is happening somewhere in the past or on the day of the murder itself. Krzysztof saw it as an opportunity for a sentimental scene where the mother gazes at her son with delight when he speaks about the curse. During one of the rehearsals, Krzysztof said, after the confession, we need to have a cut light, blackout, getting out of reality. That would be a signal that the words were uttered, but not in the reality of the single night only. Perhaps we need an intermission here to highlight dramaturgy, change the mood. Perhaps some joyful birds twittering. That's an example how Warlikowski, during Red rehearsal, thinks about putting together subsequent scenes. At that stage, he sees it like that. A monologue by Europe at the table, fade to black, Zacharias at the table, fade to black, back to the camera, positioned opposite Europa in the previous scene, and then Asia says, camera recording for an hour, you said not a single word.
There were also discussions about the power of storytelling and its effectiveness. After all, we have no guarantee that when we tell a story of a massacre, it will only have positive results and will bring about catharsis. It's not certain. This is what the actresses pointed out. Andrzej, however, was even more skeptical because he said perhaps Mławad and Tokarczuk believe in the power of storytelling, but does it really matter to everyone? Warlikowski replied, I suppose we haven't believed for quite some time that we are capable of changing the world. It's simply about creating a sense of community among the people there that evening, those who are watching. Perhaps it will cause something, trigger something in them. In Epidaurus, there was a hospital first, and then a theatre was built instead. The first stage rehearsal, Bartek Gelner, dressed in a basketball kit, is on a skipping rope. Talking about the curse, he tells to his mom, devours melon juice dripping down his chin, he falls about and ends with a joyful declaration of love. Everyone agrees that watermelon could be a better choice because it looks like a head, so it would like eating a brain on stage. The recurring question about editing. Should these scenes be spliced, or should we have a sharp cut? Should we start with the skipping rope or with a monologue? Zach and Wedia, let's come back to it. Subsequent versions. Zach is working out at the gym. Wedia drops him on his way on her way to grandma. Then they're changing. The monologue about the curse must be delivered with the energy of a sports commentator, like the best thriller. Warlikowski explained that he moved away from the scene with the watermelon because subsequent scenes would be then constrained or immobilized by the table. No extraneous elements should enter the classroom space. Again, we are back to the monologue. It's the mental stage of Europa with the girl. Europe with the little girl. She's the one who needs to be told what happened because she can't remember. We need to create the girl's world. A blanket, some toys. This will help ground the monologue in realism, although a twisted one. An escape into another world. The starting point, Europa is sitting on a chair in front of the camera, the girl on a blanket with her soft toys. Except that in the setup, the scene with the skipping rope seems impossible, hence the idea of Wedia and Zach meeting in a cafe. As they do every Sunday, they go to take some coffee and cake, and they observe a naughty child. First, the viewer needs to see the blanket. Europa's monologue continues, and then the world expands. They enter the cafe, they sit at a table. This can be achieved with lighting. It is meant to be a scene of a civilized conversation. This is what Warlikowski said to the actors. On the 9th of December, there was a new idea. Wedia and Zach watch Europa's monologue in the theater and then chat in the foyer. Warlikowski says, Mławat's text is rational, and in the rational world we must be witty. If we place the monologue within a theatrical frame, it offers enormous possibilities. This solution momentarily makes the events feel real, brings the audience back to reality, to what is here and now. And he adds, the words about the curse should be spoken in a secular manner, off stage. The 10th of December, Europa starts her monologue whilst lying. A girl in a school uniform is sitting at the desk. She starts barking, which draws Europa to the desk. The girl breaks free. A new situation. Europa is sitting at the desk and speaking. The girl is on the chair in front of the camera or runs like in a ballet from the right to the left wall. The 20th of December. We return to after a 10-day break. Europa is sitting at the desk. The girl starts in the corridor, watches the Europa through the mesh, sits down beside her and clenches her fists. Finally, off stage, applause and technical light. Meanwhile, we watch the scene between the mother and the son live on a video screen in the theater foyer. The 27th of December, Andrzej shares his intuition that Europa should dance in this monologue, physically return to the childlike atmosphere of ecstasy after murder. The 28th of December, Europa begins a rhythmic dance, stamps her feet, forces the little girl to dance, chases her. When she talks about her brother's curse, she is on the verge of tears. We can see that after the monologue, the stage light must not be lit because it dissipates energy. The 2nd of January, Europa cannot leave the stage after the monologue. Instead, she sits back on the chair and looks at school board where the scene is displayed. Europe sings La Cucaracha, they dance, a moment of shared fun, shared enjoyment, but it is interrupted by a memory of their brother. They return to their desks and the classroom is lit with bright, warm, sunny light, and then a sudden blackout. And so our journey into the heart of the process comes to an end. We have arrived to the final form of the stage, the 5th of January. Warlikowski's comments after the second dress rehearsal. There is so much tension in you. We tighten, and there is only screw which remains. You know, we are exhausted and worn out. When we're reading the scripts in the hotels, we laughed a lot. But now, this is like a septet of perfection, but the perfection is suffocating me. Do it a bit lighter, a bit more witty. We have reached the end, but we haven't seen the end yet. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So it's like a thriller of reaching the final result. I believe Caroline should take the floor now.
Writing. Brooke observed that many authors develop a kind of complicity with the material, whilst others refuse to do so. He cited Beckett as an example, who shows us how people live without taking a position on it. These words have inspired me in my reflections on the theatre of Warlikowski, who is, after all, the author of his productions. I would argue that he too takes no positions and offers no interpretation. This in turn is the greatest gift to the audience. He invites us to draw connections and to arrive at our own interpretations. And this brings us straight to the heart of Warlikowski Theatre for me. It opens up spaces for thought. His works offers an intellectual form of pleasure. Krzysztof Warlikowski's performances do not invite identification, largely because they do not tell a Korean story. This is nothing unusual in what we call post-dramatic theatre or deconstruction, but here the approach is pursued with particular radicalism. The productions assemble fragmented scenes drawn from a wide range of sources. Europa is an exception. Sometimes these fragments are thematically linked. More often, they revolve around various themes. Interwoven in this way, these scenes generate complex meta-levels of meaning. I will give you one example from Odyssey, A Story for Hollywood. An elderly Jewish lady visits a hair salon and speaks with the hairdresser. This is intercut with a projection of the iconic scene from Claude Lanzmann's film Shoah, in which the Jewish barber Abraham Bomba recounts how he was forced to cut prisoners' hair in Treblinka before they were led to the gas chambers. The screen freezes and a character named Claude Lanzmann appears, who reflects on the artistic mean by which the Shoah might be addressed. What are the themes that emerge in Krzysztof Warlikowski's productions? The world of Greek mythology is ever present. This is hardly surprising because everything is in it. Entanglement in guilt, being at the mercy of forces conceived as divine, wars, power struggles, betrayal. The second overarching theme is the Shoah. Individual stories are brought to life on stage, often based on text of Hannah Krall. From a German perspective, this aspect of Warlikowski's work is of great significance. The guest performance of Odyssey in Stuttgart in 2022 struck a particularly resonant chord as it confronted a German audience with this history from a Polish perspective. One highlight, the scene between the characters Hannah Arendt and Martin Heidegger, the confrontation between the philosopher who placed the horrors of World War II, the occupation and the Shoah at the center of her thinking, and the Professor Heidegger who had culpably become entangled in the Nazi regime. This performance not only tells the moving story of a Jewish woman mirrored in the Odyssey, but is also an evening about the act of storytelling itself. Who tells a story and for what purpose? How are memories shaped and who holds the authority to interpret them? And in relation to the Shoah, how can the indescribable be evoked? There is no psychology in Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre. No private conflicts are depicted. Everything is embedded in a historical context. A glance of photographs from Krzysztof Warlikowski's opera and theatre productions reveals that despite the variety of settings, a recognizable visual world emerges. The distinctive stage and costume designs of Małgorzata Szcześniak. Her stages are not abstract spaces, but they are composed by various concrete, realistic elements. Objects that do not naturally belong together create, through their intertwining, a new place and new layers of meaning. These environments demand to be physically engaged by the actors. There is a resistance inherent in the materials, such as iron bars or cages. Symbolic layers are woven in without being overt. Małgorzata's spaces oscillate between familiarity and strangeness and are characterized by an underlying darkness. Her spaces create their own universes, opening up your mind as a spectator. The characters who inhabit these worlds are often marked by a sense of loss, an existential rootlessness. Warlikowski and Szcześniak are not interested in fantasies of salvation. One aspect as a dramaturg for me is essential to understanding Warlikowski's theatre. We talked already about it, so I make it short. The long-standing collaboration of a core group of artists, both creative team and actors, over 15 years or more at Novi Theatre. I was part of the dramaturgical team of Europa, and during the final rehearsals, I was able to observe how profoundly scenes can evolve from one day to the next when actors have worked together for several years and there is a high level of trust. This kind of ensemble has become rare in Europe. In Germany, for example, currently no such ensemble exists. This company only stages a production every 2 to 3 years. As a result, there is no sense of routine or creative fatigue. The preparation period is long and the rehearsal process spans several months. And I would like to say it very clear, these actors are just magnificent. There is never any sentimentality, no false note, no pathos, only the utmost precision and intellectual clarity. The magic word during rehearsal was very often reduction. And yes, it is often reduced to the bare essentials, painfully so. If I were to put into words what makes Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre special to me, 3 expressions spring to my mind. It's uncompromising art, it's a profound seriousness, and an unbroken idealism. It's a theatre that touches upon the essential questions of human existence, often in a painful way. I said at the beginning that Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre offers an intellectual pleasure. They're the grand scenic images, wonderfully performed scenes, and a persistent search for beauty. And perhaps this search for beauty is the only form of redemption this theatre offers its audience.
Thank you very much. In Poland, we are always interested how this theatre is perceived abroad. Krzysztof's relations to Germany today are pretty weak. They used to be far stronger, but the two recent trips to Stuttgart with Odyssey and Elizabeth Costello were an important confrontation with the German audience. Christian, your turn. Kilka tygodni.
Krzysztof Warlikowski called me to share his excitement. He had just reread a chapter of The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, and what takes place in that chapter led him to explore a specific moment in one of the operas we are currently working on, Tannhäuser by Richard Wagner for the Hamburg State Opera. Once again, he had found in a book by Thomas Mann a passage that allowed him to enrich his reflection for a new opera production. The renewed presence of Thomas Mann in our conversations made me feel I should speak to you about him today, about Krzysztof and this profoundly European German writer. My intention is obviously not to offer a lecture on Thomas Mann in just a couple of minutes. Rather, what I would like to highlight is the resonance of Thomas Mann's work and biography in Krzysztof's thinking, artistic practice, and stage productions. This echo is all the more remarkable because Krzysztof has never, strictly speaking, adapted Thomas Mann as he did with Elias Canetti or Franz Kafka, or as he did with Mann's son, Klaus Mann, through his adaptation of Ludwig II for the Kammerspiele in Hamburg in 1994. Krzysztof himself will tell me later today what he thinks of this statement, but I would say this. For him, without Thomas Mann, there is no Germany. I do not know whether here in Poland the resonance of German culture of Krzysztof is fully understood. Krzysztof speaks French perfectly. His productions at the Nowy Theatre are systematically presented in the greatest Parisian theatres, and as you know, he has created productions in Paris with Isabelle Huppert. Even though Krzysztof does not speak German, he possesses an extraordinarily intimate knowledge of German culture, literature, and history. For Krzysztof, French culture is of course important. What would he be without Proust? Italian culture is equally significant to him, from Luchino Visconti, who brings together Marcel Proust and Thomas Mann, to Pasolini, Via Curzio Malaparte, not to mention, of course, Sicily, its beauty and its excess, and Venice, the splendor of Venice, the sensual intensity of Venice. And I must obviously mention ancient Greece, its tragedies and the grace of its sculptures, perhaps what moves him the most. But Germany is something of an obsession for him. In the taxi taking me to Brussels airport yesterday, the driver told me he was a Pole happy to live in Belgium. I asked him whether he ever returned to his country. His answer was cutting. No, since that madman Tusk came back to power, everything has been destroyed. And besides, he added, he is a German. No, for me, if anyone embodies a kind of German influence, Polish identity, even more than Robert Lewandowski, it is Krzysztof. For him, Thomas Mann is a threshold. He is a gateway into 20th century Germany. From his first major novel, The Buddenbrook, published 1901, to Dr. Faustus, his final major work, his legacy, and in my opinion, one of the greatest reflections ever written on art and history, published in 1947, Thomas Mann developed a series of books of incomparable literary and philosophical scope, in which the Magic Mountain is crucial for Krzysztof. And one must never forget another dimension unique to Thomas Mann, something no other major 20th century novelist possessed to the same degree. He was a passionate and a great connoisseur of classical music and opera. So let me speak a little about music now, about Krzysztof and music. Krzysztof staged Parsifal at the Paris Opera and Tristan und Isolde at the Bavarian State Opera in Munich. Tannhäuser in Hamburg will therefore be the third Wagner opera. He staged Die Frauenschatten in Munich, Elektra in Salzburg, Salome again in Munich, and the Rosenkavalier at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Paris. All those impressive operas by Richard Strauss. I should also mention the two operas by Alban Berg, Wozzeck at the Dutch National Opera in Amsterdam, and Lulu at La Monnaie in Brussels. And finally, Fidelio by Beethoven, which he will stage next year in Baden-Baden, each time with extraordinary singers, orchestras, and conductors. In other words, over the past 18 years, Krzysztof has continually worked with the greatest operatic works in the German language. Only Wagner's Ring and Moses und Aaron by Schönberg are still missing, but that time will come. For Krzysztof, and I want to stress this essential point, music is never innocent, and even less so when it is German music. When he staged the Frauenschatten in Munich in 2013, it was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the reopening of the Opera House in 1963, which had reopened with a production of the same Strauss opera. An opera house that had been completely destroyed by bombing during the war in 1943. An opera house that has once belonged to Ludwig II and that was the house of Richard Wagner before the construction of his theater in Bayreuth. One of my greatest pleasures in working with Krzysztof is talking about history. Above all, the history of the 20th century. No other opera director I know has such an interest in the history of the tragedies of the last century. And in our conversations, Germany keeps coming back again and again. You all know how central the Shoah, the fate of the Jews in the first half of the 20th century, is to his thinking and to his theater. Throughout his long Winterreise through German music and culture, Thomas Mann has been Krzysztof's principal guide. To conclude, I would like to mention a few points that we can develop further later on if needed, points that are essential in Thomas Mann and which I believe are just as significant in Krzysztof's work. The decadent artist, haunted by death, by illness, by the irrational, the ambiguity, Germany and the pact with the devil, the exile, the artist, brother of the madman and the criminal, the temptation of evil, the dialogue with evil, the swan song of Western culture, Germany, poetic genius, metaphysics, self-destruction, anti-Semitism, a fundamental pessimism, the impossibility of healing, the role of irony and humor. The healthy man is of no interest. Germany as a spiritual battlefield. Apollo and Dionysus. Civilization and its discontents. The seductions of the androgynous. The dark and luminous sides of music. Music as metaphysical truth. The surgery of the soul. The impurity, the fragments and the continuity, the cultural impasse in which Europe finds itself. Wagner, Mahler, Strauss, Hans Castorp, Adrian Leverkühn, Goethe-Dämmerung. We know that Thomas Mann, during the summer of 1911, on a beach on the island of the Lido in Venice, was fascinated by a boy, or 12 or 13. He gave his character, Gustav von Aschenbach, in his short novel Death in Venice, this obsession with the expression of unattainable, bewitching beauty, while cholera looms, while death may strike at any moment. The child who fascinated Thomas Mann that summer was Polish, and his name was Vladislav. I do not know what Krzysztof, young boy from Stettin, actually not so far away from Lübeck, looked like at the age of 13. But since I learned that it was a young Polish boy who inspired Tadzio, Aschenbach's untouchable object of desire, there is a kind of confusion in my mind. Vladislav, Tadzio, Krzysztof begin to blur. Some years ago, we walked for a long time on these beaches of the Lido, close to the Hôtel des Bains, together with Malgorzata Szczesniak and Claude Bardouille, while preparing a new production of the opera The Bassarides, based on Euripides by the composer Hans Werner Henze for the Salzburg Festival. Henze, a German composer exiled in Italy, fascinated by ancient Greece, admirer of Thomas Mann's work, again and again, Apollo and Dionysus in Germany. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much indeed. I have this feeling that when talking about the phenomenon of Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre, as we are reminded by this display on the screen, we've been to different places and different times throughout Europe. And that is the feature of this very theatre, that it stretches between times and spaces. Last but not least, Joanna Tokarska-Bakir. The floor is yours. I have chosen two topics out of many that I have prepared for today. The first one would be a question. I can only ask it. How Krzysztof Warlikowski builds his authority in his dialogue with the audience. And before I tell you about it, I would like to refer to what Piotr said before about the fact that Krzysztof Warlikowski does not make a theatre because he knows what to say, but because he doesn't. In my opinion, that very sentence, that very statement, Socratesian one, opens an enormous space for liberty. It opens space. I think this will do if I say that. My response to that, how Krzysztof Warlikowski builds his authority, is in a statement that he does it on weakness. There is a rhetorical structure named litota. I have a definition in here. Litota, from Greek, modesty, simplicity. Litota is an opposition of hyperbole. It's based on replacing a statement with a denied expression, like instead of silent, we say not loud. That structure is supposed to weaken the hard statement. In my opinion, Warlikowski theatre is Litota's theatre. Now, about building on weaknesses.
I would like to mention three aspects. First, to Warlikowski and his theatre, I would find a definition of a person, of a character, like from Man gewesen by Herder. This luck is the finite state of perspective, the endlessness of perspective, or a guilt. The characters in Krzysztof Warlikowski's art are those who carry the guilt, inadequacy, abundance, lack, or the sense of isolation. These burdens are often opportunities to seek for solution. And now another weakness. Building on weakness is manifested in the search for texts with a weakened sense of authorship. The method of creating production was called by Gruszczyński, following Jan Kotlek, rubbing one text against another, which frees the director from specific loyalty, and this way directs him towards something that Czesław Miłosz, following Bloom, called text's susceptibility to betrayal. What does this strategy offer, one may ask? In my opinion, it lets us move beyond grand récits, the grand narratives, which tend to have some totalitarian tendencies, as we all know. This method helps us dismantle the binaries, either or, sacrificial frameworks which are related to binaries. Upon the weakened notion of authorship, Warlikowski builds his post-secular soliloquies. Why do I call them post-secular? Because despite the mistrust towards religious thinking, which is like Warlikowski's characteristic feature, in the constructs he builds, we can see old, archaic, sacred concepts of relief, order, purification, and forgiveness. In a way, they are encapsulated in the term catharsis, but I will refer to it later on. In Warlikowski's last performance, the hope for getting the sacred concept is expressed by Y.G. Mławad's character Zacharias, who raped, killed, and devoured his victim. I quote, "For 7 years I've been in the chaos looking for the words restoring the order. The monologue of the murderer cannibal bears a striking resemblance to the monologue of little SS officer von Auer included in the text of Apollonia. I will come back to it later on as well. So we've got God, atheism with God's lining, and nihilism of home, and this again I refer to litotes. It's like a weakened messianism of Benjamin, and that would be the third factor, the third pillar of the director's theatre. And now coming back to the second aspect, from Apollonia to Europa. 10 years after Gross's publication on the killing in Jedwabne was brought out, which was a bit too late, Warlikowski decided to stage Apollonia. As you might remember, it consisted of very precisely intertwined texts, Euripides, Aeschylus, and fragments of Hannah Krall's and Little's texts. The director's intention was revealed by Little's excerpts most prominently. Warlikowski shared the power over the performance with Little. It was really strange, peculiar to listen to von Aue, who uses the words of Agamemnon and then the words of an Israeli soldier, the godson of a Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust. But catharsis did not occur. 12 years ago, the performance was summarized in the following way. In the world where we cannot provoke heaven, Warlikowski provokes the audience. You didn't feel like saying sorry for Jedwabne, so now you can live without forgiving. And the issue of forgiving and the price for neglecting the forgiveness is what Warlikowski comes back to. To the context of Holocaust, he adds the context of the hell of the Middle East. Those aspects used for some trivial purposes, while used in art, can do wonders. One of Mławat's characters, Wedia, says to be missing parts of the lost entirety, the elements which explain the curse cast on the family, the curse caused by the crime of 8-year-old Europa, who revealed where the children had been hiding. The bigger entirety we are talking about, whose parts can be found within this puzzle, is not a historical riddle wondering who was the first one to kill, but the question on the genre you can use to allocate human unhappiness so that they do not produce new coffins. Now I would like to share what I discovered when, persuaded by the author of the text and the director, I decided to build my own model to understand Mławat's oeuvre. I found the common language linking both sides of the Mediterranean Sea. The Greek heritage makes it possible to return to a conversation which is impossible at any other ground. The sea, seen from Mławat's Lebanon perspective, it does not divide but show the antique commonness of the experience. Mławat precisely tells what I would say a new version of Pelopidi curse rooted in a new reality. The Zacharias is rapes and kills and like Pelop and a cannibal because he is the perpetrator of bad luck, and he rather than Grandma Europe triggers the curse which he tries to reverse. In the case of Zacharias and his fault, perceived in a Greek rather than Christian manner, the act of redemption is about cognition. Repent is something opposite. It brings relief to those who live rather than to those who die. Katarmos, which was organized in Delft after the suicide of an orphan, Kalasu showed that in the ritual of catharsis, the blame should be played or performed in a theatrical manner to discover what was its root, what its root cause was. And this is the sense of repeating, being so deep in the blame to finally discover it through immersion. The blame is not about committing some acts, but about committing them without being aware that they were really committed. The greatest discovery was to understand the rule which leads Zacharias as the one who leads the choir. It's like feeling the promise in Plato's work, what hurt you shall cure you. Hotrosas lasetai in Greek. In the famous second speech on the love and the soul, Socrates refers to the myth of Telephos, the son of Auge and Heracles, who was hurt by Achilles and with a spear, and that was a wound that never healed. And the oracle said, "What hurts you will cure you." On contact with some fragments of Achilles' spears, the wound was spontaneously healed. This mysterious principle, which was often neglected in Europe and perceived as primitive, holds a very important space in Europe's mythical circulation. I quote, in the first Grail legend, we can read that the Grail is used to satiate the hunger, and it belongs to the one who will first say to the guardian, the king, paralyzed owing to the terrible wound, "What is your anguish?" That was the question the Amphotras was never asked, and the infertile land around him. Now Mławat and Warlikowski ask the same question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And referring to Joanna's words, we should add a bit of information that was critical for us, where we had in the opening lecture in Collège de France, where Muhammad spoke as a visiting professor. He spoke about that apart from democracy, the basis for Europe is a tragedy. And the fact that we exclude our tragedy from our horizon, from our mindset, makes Europe never full, because a missing tragedy excludes the possibility of forgiveness. Without forgiveness, you cannot progress. So I believe that somehow matches what we were discussing, because the topic of tragedy as one of the key components, elements of Krzysztof Warlikowski Theatre's phenomenon seems to be fundamental. I don't know how that happened. I don't know when Krzysztof took his lessons into antiquity, but it gives whatever happened later in his theatre and whatever happened in theatre as such. I am flabbergasted after all these words, because every intervention presented the theatre from a different perspective, and I think all that creates a sort of a landscape which is as complex as the topic of our study itself. So I think we shouldn't be trying to untangle that. Now I would like to ask you, we have little time left and our attention is pretty exhausted. So I'd like to ask you, after we have listened to all the opinions, what has stuck in your brains most as a foundation for Krzysztof Warlikowski's theatre? Not the phenomenon, but just the theatre. For me, as I said, it's the necessity of tragedy, not in the theatre, but in our lives. The need to confront it rather than avoiding it, excluding it, erasing it. It won't change a thing, while confrontation can lead us to something. And please bear in mind this Athena's gesture, who acquitted the accused, and we are missing this Athena's judgment, but it should calm us down. So, one by one, just the way we started first. So we'd like to ask Guy as the first one, Theresa, Anya, Krzysztof, Caroline, Christian, and the last person. Guy, over to you.
Chciałbym prosić, żeby każdy...
So I would like you to say, after hearing all the other speakers, what rests in your mind mostly? What is the element provided by Warlikowski's theatre? There are many options.
For me, theatre of Warlikowski is theatre of tearing, mostly. Theatre of tearing, yes. It's my, and it is for me what impressed me the first time I saw a piece of Warlikowski. This impression of tearing and the strong solidarity as a spectator, as audience, with this impression. So I was really in the same level of impression, of emotion.
Dziękuję.
Thank you, Theresa.
I would say, since I've been studying Peter Brook quite a bit, as we all know, theatre starts with the empty space. There's absolutely nothing, it's pitch dark. So everything that comes into a performance has really been chosen and put there out of a desire to express something. Every light, every sound, everything, and not to speak of the actors who act within this coded system of signs. What strikes me most is how absolutely complete the performances of Warlikowski are, in the sense of they come to a fullness of expressions with all these tools that exist to create something alive on stage, and yet it is never, so to speak, impressed by its own complete beauty and perfection. It's never perfect, and that's where I very much appreciated what has been said here about the wound, the tragic, the sadness of not being perfect that we all carry somehow, and that we fall into these black holes, because I feel that there's a fragility in the performances that does invite us as the audience to really join in and be with the people we meet on stage, be with the fiction, be with the myth that they are all formed by, and that sort of goes through them. So I think that is what I will also bring back home from this discussion today, actually.
Kiedy jakiś czas temu
Sometime, many years ago, a book was published in French about Warlikowski's theatre. It was initiated by late Georges Bagne, who participated in our discussion a couple of years ago here. And the book was named Theatre Écorché, so the naked, stripped theatre. Écorché refers to the models, skinned theatre. The Écorché model was used for learning and teaching anatomy for artists. So skinned theatre, and we have this tragic wound here. These two terms go hand in hand together very well. Anya, over to you. For me, the question about the strength of the story is pivotal. The efficacy of theatre, its capacities and boundaries. And I would like to refer to Caroline's words about the Odyssey scene, where in the performance a fragment from the Shoah film was used. Initially, during rehearsals, there was this idea that this scene was acted out. There is a person of a hairdresser. It's a meeting of Isolde with the hairdresser, and this Abraham's Bomba story comes out. But quickly Krzysztof noted that would be an abuse, acting out in the theatre of a true testimony. So this observation for me, on the one hand, of this great trust in the theatre, I don't know if Krzysztof agrees, I think so, and its boundaries and capacities, because the theatre, not everything is permitted, not everything can be done in the theatre. And the second idea is from Professor Tokarska-Bakir about building authority upon weakness. That will stay with me, and thank you very much for your words. Caroline.
So as a theater person, of course, I'm always overwhelmed by the capacity of the theatrical means, but what is much more simple, that it is a theater that really tells about things who are important. And this is not so often. I mean, we go often to the theater and then you see things and say, okay, and that's all. But here you are really confronted with the world, with the really essential questions, and you can feel the seriousness, really the need to dig into these tragic ideas. So that's for me something special. And I would like to finish with an observation, because I'm working since 30 years in theaters, and I make like 4 or 5 productions a year. So, and you have wonderful actors who come with ideas to the rehearsal, and then they work, and then something comes out. But there is a second category of directors, and I think the miracle is that their inspiration, the intelligence, is the glooming magma that leads the whole rehearsal process. And it has to do with the personality, and with that you can really feel that it's topics of life. So this is for me the miracle, and this category is very small, and Krzysztof Warlikowski is definitely in that category.
I won't talk about opera, but about theater and about theater productions of Krzysztof. What impresses me every time I see one of his productions is the energy of the band. I always have the feeling that's a band. When the actors come on stage, it's a band. And they are all part of kind of Gesamtkunstwerk. And this ability to deliver each one a certain kind of nuance, and that everything makes something so special. And I want also to say a word about Pavel Miketin, because Pavel's work is so connected to the theater of Krzysztof. It's really it's very often the way you enter or you leave the actual world to enter the world of Krzysztof. So it's for me, Pavel's work is very, very important. And I would like also to emphasize a very last point. Of course, Krzysztof's work deals with the tragedy of the 20th century. But what is also very present is this sense of humor, of irony. And even in Europe, you have this capacity to add this level also of emotions among the tragedy is for me very, very important.
Joanna, ostatnie słowo.
Last word from you. I would enumerate such words. I would quote the previous speakers. Guy said, open wound. Caroline said about suspension of judgment. Suspending a judgment which is actually a gift for the audience, because the director guides the audience but makes them make the gesture themselves. And the third thing would pertain to an issue which is like, well, ridiculing. And in the recent reviews on Europe, I read about the power of story. What I was talking about, which is expressed by reenactment. So presenting the scenario of a harm, of injury, to understand what really happened is the function of a story. It can be ritual when it is shown through a ritual or through a theater, but it can also be told using words when it's a myth, a novel, or another genre expressed by words. In my opinion, it's still an open task, and no ironists should persuade us not to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, our time is up. I believe it was a really intensive journey. I'm really happy that the festival promised to publish the text of all interventions to the story. There will be extended versions of these statements, so I'm really happy to read it one day. Thank you. Okay, Guy, you want to say something? Over to you.
To add something, few words. I have a real memory of the end of Odyssey. It was Ewa Pilawska as the book. This, for me, one of the more strong images of his theater, so strong that I took a picture of Eva in the backstage in Athens. And for me, in a sense, the theater of Warlikowski is a theater of the book. And yesterday, the 8-year girl, Claude, is a kind of the book. And for me, is a key to of this incredible brightness of culture of Krzysztof.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all for your participation, for your contribution, and we'll close our anatomical theatre with it. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.